One more question for you. Do you prefer this method with me writing down what I talk about to PowerPoints or the other way around? How many of you like PowerPoints as a regular feature in class? Yeah, kind of like it. Okay. So, yeah.
I like them as long as I know some professors like they just put everything on the PowerPoint and then they just read off the PowerPoint and then that's boring because we're able to read.
Yeah, so that's what I try to make a kind of compromise here to write down everything, the summary or a pretty detailed summary of every lecture on paper for you, so you can read it independently, and then I do in class whatever I want to do. So that is I tried to. Okay, it's good. So good to know that there are many people who are heartbroken about the absence of PowerPoints in class. Sometimes I wish I had them because of some of the graphs and some of the tables that I had to abuse the free labor of my students to write it down on the blackboard. But okay, friends, we have to finish this entire segment of our course having to do with the firms and corporations and production within the firm and so on. So we're going to try and do that today by talking about chapter 29 of your book, which is the prices of the factors of production. And from next week on, we will turn more to the financial markets, interest rates, and stuff like that. Financial economics, theory of interest rates, investment, and so on. So this problem here is not new for you. You will remember that we already discussed it in a variety of ways thus far. One obvious aspect of the problem that we already discussed is this difference that we drew at the very first class and reiterate a couple of times throughout the semester, this difference between consumer and producer goods. Consumer versus producer goods. And initially we spent just 40% of our class time thus far in trying to analyze and understand the process of price formation of the prices of consumer goods, supply, demand, and equilibrium, and competition, and so on. That is a theory of consumer goods. Then we started talking about producer goods or factors of production. You know what is the difference between consumer and producer goods. What's the basic difference? Both of them are useful or scarce economic goods, but there is one big difference between them. Yeah. So consumer good has its utility, derives its utility from its capacity to satisfy our needs directly. Whereas producer goods, what is the source of their value, economic value? Scarcity. Why would anyone be willing to pay a price, to sacrifice something else to get a unit of a producer good?
Consumer good?
Yeah, exactly. Their contribution to the production of consumer goods. So consumer goods are, consumer is in charge, consumer is in driver's seat. We call that consumer sovereignty. Everything that happens in an economy happens for one and only reason, to satisfy the needs of consumers. Producer goods are worthy or valuable insofar as they contribute to this. And this process is called the process of imputation. The value resides in our heads, in our minds, on our preference scales, how much we like or do not like something. Then the value is imputed into consumer goods. Consumer our needs, to satisfy our wants. And then from there, the value of all downstream goods that were used in the production process, the process of transformation of final creation of consumer goods, are given their value from the consumer goods. So this is this example that we use. California wine is expensive not because the Napa Valley vineyards where the grapes were grown are expensive to buy. It's the other way around. Vineyards are expensive because they participate in the process of creating something that consumers like very much and are ready to pay a higher price for California wine or French, like Bordeaux. The vineyards in the region of Bordeaux are some of the most expensive pieces of agricultural land in the world. It's not that they're just beautiful and scenic and that people want to buy them for some independent things. The reason why is that you can grow grapes, specific grapes that create the Bordeaux wines, which are astronomically expensive. So this is the process of imputation. That the value is imputed backwards from consumer goods to producer goods. And we also analyzed, you will remember those examples that we used in trying to understand the internal functioning of the firm, this entire story of marginal, total revenue, average revenue, and so on. We're going to be revisiting all that stuff today, and you'll see how that all those pieces fit together in a theory of the price determination of producing goods, determination of the prices of produced goods, to be more precise. One more warning or one more reminder here for all of us is that all or almost all of the tools of economic analysis that we developed with regard to consumer goods and all of the major principles that we developed for the explanation of consumer goods prices could be applied and will be applied in the theory of producing goods prices. So the most obvious and basic one is the supply and demand framework. So what determines the prices of producer goods? Supply of those goods and demand. The same familiar curves, the same familiar concepts of equilibrium quantity, equilibrium price. So good. That's the mechanism through which the prices of all of those goods are determined. So we developed this for the theory of consumer goods initially. Now we say this is the exact same analytical apparatus could be applied to producer goods. The second principle is marginal analysis. Marginal utility is the principle of consumer theory. Remember that the value of any given unit of a stock of a good, for example, Robinson Crusoe's sacks of corn, is determined by the utility of the marginal unit. So the marginal utility diminishes. You acquire new and new units because you satisfy the less and less important needs with additional units, and you have to sacrifice in order to acquire additional units of A, you have to sacrifice more and more units of a B. So marginal utility, what is the equivalent concept in the theory of production? We already mentioned it. We already developed it as a part of our theory of the firm. What is the equivalent concept? Marginal utility is in consumer theory. In producer theory is marginal productivity. So anyone remembers what is marginal productivity? it's also diminishing as you increase the quantity of a good at your disposal. So we will apply that. We will use the concept of marginal productivity to explain the prices of producing goods in the exact same fashion we use the concept of marginal utility to explain the prices of consumers. We'll come back to that. Just the definition, what is marginal productivity? Any given good. It's an increase in revenue or an increase in total value produced, total value product, as it's technically called, that one gets by increasing supply of one variable factor by 1 unit. In order to more precisely define this, we need the principle also assumed in the theory of consumer goods that we're now going to adopt for the production theory. That's the assumption of homogeneity. Homogeneity of supply. What that means? That means that every one unit of a given stock of goods is equally serviceable, equally good as any other unit. They're identical. So in the case of Robinson Crusoe, you remember Robinson Crusoe, the sacks of corn were equally good because you could use any one of them. He had 5 for any 5 potential utilizations that he had to make bread, to make whiskey, to feed birds, and so on and so forth. So this assumption of homogeneity of goods is applied also and accepted in the theory of productive factors. So we assume that every unit of a given production factor, let's say labor, is equally good, equally serviceable, could serve the same purposes as any other. Of course, we know that this is not a realistic assumption. We know that there are different parts, different segments of the labor market, and that not all laborers are equally productive, but we use this simplifying assumption in the same way in which we use it in the theory of consumer behavior to understand the characteristics of the market better, irrespective of the fact that sometimes this is not the case in reality. So you already got used to this anomaly in economic theory that sometimes you have, in order to learn something true, you have to assume that something false is the truth. Seems paradoxical and weird, but it is the case. It's just a simplifying assumption. Homogeneity of the factors of production. So every unit of labor is equally good as any other unit of labor. Worker. Any piece of particular machinery is equally serviceable as any other piece of machinery. The fourth principle, which is different than in consumer theory, is that the model is built on the distinction between constant and variable factors. So you have a distinction between constant and variable factors. What is the difference between the constant and variable factors? Constant factors are those factors that do not change, the quantity of which doesn't change as a function of the changes in the volume of production. Simply put, that means as you increase production, the number of units of that factor that you use doesn't change. Whereas variable factor is a factor that changes in tandem with the changes in the volume of production. You produce more, you use more of that factor, you produce less, you use less of that factor. For example, in a McDonald's, actually, if you increase just the quantity of raw material, meat, or the number of machines that you use without changing the number of workers, labor is a constant factor. Or vice versa. If you don't change anything else, you just employ another person, then labor is a variable factor. Then you look at what's gonna happen, what's gonna change as a consequence of that in the productivity. So the model that we developed based on the foregoing 4 principles here, the model of marginal productivity, is that we assume another simplification. So don't kill me. Be patient. All factors of production but one are considered to be constant. We want to keep them constant in order, why? And just one is variable. Just one is variable. Is variable one. You want to isolate the effects of individual factors. So marginal productivity, we can define marginal productivity by saying that it is an increment in revenue, in value produced by adding one more unit of a variable factor. Or you can define it in the opposite way. You can say that the marginal productivity is the value lost if you lose one marginal unit of a variable factor, while keeping all other factors constant. So marginal productivity of labor in a McDonald's company would be how much revenue would have been lost if you fire one worker without changing anything else. That's marginal productivity of a marginal unit. That's that one unit that you subtract from the payroll or add payroll. So that's the basic model how we analyze how are we going to determine the prices of factors of production. Now here there is one dogma that I will have first to formulate for you, like some theologian, and then I will explain why this dogma is supremely important. This dogma is called the law of returns. And what it says something about the relationship between constant and variable factors. It defines the relationship. And it says for any combination of one variable factor and a multiple constant factors. So it has to be one variable factor and more than one remaining constant factor. There is only one optimal level of variable factor that will maximize the total value product. Only one optimal level of a variable factor that maximizing total value product. Total value product is the key concept here. What is the total value product? Anyone remembers that? For any combination of one variable factor and multiple fixed factors or constant factors, there is only one optimal level of a variable factor, one definite level of a variable factor that will maximize the total value product. Total value product is simply total revenue. Physical product is the number of units that you sell. Value product is the number of units times price per unit. That's the value product. It doesn't matter. You can produce 100,000 goods. The value product will depend on the price that you can charge. So we already know when analyzing this fishing boat situation in our theory of performance a few last sessions ago, that the maximization of the total value product is identical to maximizing profit. And now, if we want to do this, there is only one optimal combination, only one optimal level of variable factor. What does that mean? That means simply that you cannot indefinitely increase your productivity by increasing one factor while not changing anything else. You see that? So there is an upper limit of how much you can increase your productivity by increasing the number of units of one factor that you use while keeping everything else constant. So imagine an example that I want to grow corn in a flower pot. So I would need a complementary factors. That's these factors that work together in tandem to produce something. So what are the complementary factors here? Flower pot. I need some soil. I need water to water the plant. I need maybe fertilizer to boost the growth of the corn. I need seeds. Maybe to play some music, plant grows better, some Bach or Mozart, maybe not. But there are 3 or 4 at least complementary factors that are necessary in order for a plant to increase. And now imagine that I keep everything constant. I have just one flower pot, the same quantity of soil, the same quantity of water, and I just add a little bit of miracle growth, a little bit more fertilizer. So I can increase my corn yield that way. What if I double fertilizer or triple or increase it 10 times? Can I increase my corn yield 100,000 times just by adding more and more miracle growth without anything else, without adding another flower pot, without adding more soil, without using more water to water the plant? No, of course. Otherwise, I could have grown the entire supply of corn in the world in one flower pot. If you don't accept that there is an upper limit of how much you can increase your productivity by adding one additional units of one variable factor. So that's the principle of law of returns. That after a while, productivity increase that you get by adding more units of one isolated factor are going to start to diminish in terms. Reminds you of something, diminishing returns, diminishing increments in productivity as you keep piling up the units of one variable factor. It reminds you of anything that we did in consumer theory. Yeah, diminishing marginal utility. Yeah, it's the same principle in a different setting. So returns are going to diminish, and eventually they're going to hit 0. And after a while, you can actually burn the plant. If you overdo the miracle, you may have with less corn than if you hadn't used any miracle growth at all. After a while, your returns will be negative. You add more of one variable factor, you get less than without. Not only that your returns diminish, that you get less and less with every subsequent unit being added to the supply. Eventually, you're going to start losing negative returns. So you cannot grow the entire supply of corn in the United States and get all of those wonderful corn subsidies from the federal government in one flower pot. You need a combination of different factors of production, complementary factors of production. So you have, sooner or later, you will have to increase production of to increase the supply of other factors. So now, we've seen that the total productivity, total value product is one parameter that we want to maximize. What is the relationship between total, marginal, and average? 3 categories that we all study. Marginal and average. Can we first define them? What is marginal value product? And what is the difference between marginal and average? Marginal value product, how much your productivity increases when you add one more unit. Total, quantity times price. Average productivity, average value product. Wow, that's simple high school math. What is it? What is an average? Total divided by the number of homogeneous units. So average value product is the total value product divided by the number of units, by the total number of units. So now there is a mathematical relationship between these three categories that could be very neatly, that we already, the table that we analyzed as a part of our theory of the firm analysis had already shown that. I'm going to just remind you this. I'm going to just show you this in a graphical fashion, the same type of relationship. So if you imagine here the graph where the output or productivity is in the vertical axis, here is the unit of one variable factor, let's say labor. So then the total productivity curve will look something like this. So you increase the unit, you increase the number of labor units in your production process while keeping everything else constant. It will start growing very quickly first, then the rate of growth will slow down, and eventually it will go below zero. You will be at this point here, you will be adding maybe more units of labor, and your total productivity will not increase. If you look here, what happens with the average and the marginal curves? So let's say that this is the point labeled 1. You added 100 workers, very low. So this is your marginal curve, I'll explain. Marginal productivity. This is your average. This is the point labeled 2 here. And here is the third point, where marginal productivity curve actually hits 0. So this is just a graphical representation of something that you will remember now from our theory of the firm, that the profit maximizing point for a firm is a point where total productivity is maximized, and productivity is 0. So total productivity at maximum, marginal productivity near 0. It's never real 0, but it's near 0 here. So that's the same point. Total productivity is the maximum, marginal productivity is at 0. And average productivity, you see, it's lower than the maximum. Average value product is smaller than the maximum average product. So remember this fishing boat expedition, that the point where the average gain for the workers is maximized is always higher at a lower level of investment, at a lower number of workers than the profit maximizing point. So that's what is meant by this, that the average productivity is a lower. Here is the maximum. Here is the optimal profit maximizing point. That's why self-governing socialistic firm will have higher wages, because the average gains are larger than in a profit maximizing firm. But the profit maximizing firm will have more people employed and higher total value product. To see what is the total value product created if you use the maximum. Here, that would be the total value created if you want to maximize average product. Okay, so now we found out that the point where the productivity, the overall value productivity of a firm is maximized is the one when the marginal productivity goes to almost zero. Now, this is strange. We've seen the basic definition says that the wages correspond to marginal productivity. Okay, wages are determined by marginal productivity. If marginal productivity is zero, aren't wages then zero? What do you think? This is very tricky and subtle point here. If you can solve this, you don't have to come to any additional class. I'm gonna you know what we're gonna do. If you solve me this problem, I'm gonna waive your final exam. You don't have to take the final exam. How does this fit concept that we know that wages are non-zero? If wages are determined by marginal productivity, and if profit maximizing point is the marginal productivity being zero, doesn't that mean that wages have to be zero?
You have the highest amount of profit when giving up the lowest, that's wages then. Like the company's making a good profit, they'd be paying them well.
But then they will be paying more, but then it's not marginal productivity. What is the difference?
Aren't the wages tied up in the expenses though?
Overall expenses.
Yeah.
Yes, but this is the definition. What determines the prices of factors of production, including wages, is marginal productivity. If marginal productivity goes close to zero, how come then the wages do not go close to zero? Go back to Robinson Crusoe. What is marginal utility? It's not some number. It's the utility of a marginal unit. How much Robinson Crusoe loses by losing 1 unit of 1 sack of corn. What he loses the least important utilization of any one individual sack of corn. Go ahead.
So would it be because each additional employee after that would no longer be contributing, so they're worth $0 to you?
Yeah. Hot. You're on the right track. So apply that to the previous units.
So
compare it.
So each employee before that has a positive value.
Yes,
so
as
they're
a positive.
worth something to you. But as soon as they stop being worth something to you, you're not going to hire.
Yeah, you're gonna. So what is the marginal productivity here? Is the productivity of the marginal unit. So if you hire 10 people, your marginal productivity is, let's say, $1,000. And if you hire the 12th person, your marginal productivity, your increment in revenue will be $100. So what is the productivity of the marginal unit, 12 unit? $900. So it's not the productivity. Marginal productivity is the productivity of marginal unit, how much you gain by, or whatever it might be, 500, 600. Your marginal productivity will be, let it be 0. And now you ask the question, what's going to happen if I lose one worker? How much money would I lose?
Well, if you made $0, you wouldn't lose any money. Is that what you're saying?
Do you think? Let's say that my marginal productivity is $0. If I hire the 13th person, I will be losing money. So I'm not going to hire the 13th person. But then you ask me, the wage will be determined by how much I would have lost if I lost the 12th marginal worker. How much would I have lost? $1,000. How much your revenue would have gone down if you lost one. So the logic is the same. The logic of losing one marginal unit. How much Crusoe would have lost? Crusoe would have lost the value of the least important utilization. Here, what you would have lost? The marginal utilization of any one individual worker. So we assume that supply of labor is homogeneous, that all workers are mutually substitutable in the same sense in which the sacks of corn are mutually substitutable. So then, what is the marginal productivity of labor? Would be the least important, the least productive utilization of any one worker. So imagine that you are the owner of the firm, and I work in some very profitable part of the business, but we are mutually substitutable, and I quit. What are you going to do? Shut down the whole operation because Jankovic quit this more important job? No. You're going to shift somebody else to work in my place, and you're going to sacrifice only the least important, the least productive part of the business process. In the same sense that Robinson Crusoe shuts down only the least important consumer need. So that's why the wages are determined by the value that the company would have lost if it lost one unit of labor, which corresponds to the least important business operation that one worker can do. That will determine wage of everybody. That's the meaning. That's the meaning of the marginal productivity here. It's a utility maximization. If the guy is rational in the same sense in which Crusoe is rational. So you get this? So the logic of losing one marginal unit you can best understand. So it's not 0. So in the profit maximizing situation, marginal productivity is 0. You cannot improve your situation further. If you add one more worker, revenue you will be losing revenue. But how high the wages will be at the point when marginal productivity is 0 is determined by how much you would have lost in revenue if you lose one worker, irrespective where this worker is, in which production process, because you're going to reshuffle the remaining supply of labor in the same way Robinson Crusoe reshuffles the remaining four sacks of corn. For number 1, number 2, number 3, and number 4 utilizations on his value scale, cutting off the 5th one. In the same sense, you're going to cut off the least important utilization of any one worker and continue. Of course, what's going to happen if you lose the second worker?
It would double.
No, it doesn't have to double, but it will increase. Same logic. You're losing the units of something. The value of the remaining stock per unit for you increases. So the wages increase. Okay, so this is important. Just need to know that you're on the same page with me here. Always go back to Crusoe. That's the reason. It's not some kind of strange sadistic impulse on my place to pester you with Robinson Crusoe all the time. It's important to understand some very complicated things that in the theory of production as well. Okay, one more thing here. This is not a complete theory of wages. So wages are determined by marginal productivity in this sense. There is one more complication here, and that's the process of discounting or interest. So it's not quite correct to say that wages are determined by the productivity of the marginal unit. So maybe that's a better terminology. So we don't say that marginal productivity determines wages, but the productivity of a marginal unit, which means how much revenue you lose by losing one unit. That's not enough. Why is that not enough? What do you think? So you're producing me, the marginal unit produces $1,000 for me. As an entrepreneur. That's the marginal value product that I get by having you all around. 12 of you. Well,
You're not going to pay $1,000 though.
am I going to pay $1,000 in wages? Why? Why not?
You wouldn't make a profit.
Why would I be making profit?
You'd be making a profit, but you'd be paying it all back to in wages.
Yeah. Why is that? How much lower your wages will be than $1,000? It's going to be lower than $1,000. What will determine how much lower? Discounting process, which is diminishing or discounting the value of your wages by the interest rate. So I pay your wages right now. You get the wages in real time, every week, every 2 weeks. I wait for the product to be completed and sold on the market. I wait for revenue. So I need the compensation for waiting, which is determined by the interest rate. So whatever it is, $950, 2%, 3% interest rates. So I have to discount this value productivity that you provide on me by the interest rate. So I'm going to pay you. That's the same transaction as a credit transaction. I give you $100 right now, and you have to pay me more than $100 in the future. Because present money is more valuable than future money. Your wages are present income. My revenue from selling the product is future income. So an equal trade here would mean that your wages have to be discounted, have to be reduced slightly. So that's the source of profit, interest income for me. Otherwise, I wouldn't have had any motivation to invest in production. I can put my money in a bank and earn an interest income corresponding to the interest rate, market interest rate. So that's one of the reasons why generic interest rate that is determined by the time preference, which means how much people prefer present to the future, has to be unique, has to be one price. Because otherwise, if there is a different interest rate for business investment, which is lower than the interest rate that people can get on a loan of a similar duration, similar maturity, nobody would invest. And then there will be an arbitrage opportunity here. People will be moving money from a business that has a lower interest rate to a business that has a higher interest rate. And eventually they have to arbitrage a way to equalize. So discounted marginal value product determines the price of any given factor. So it's not only wages, it's a rental price of a machine. How much would you pay for a machine right now that can give you $10,000 in 1 year as an entrepreneur? You're thinking whether to buy it or not. Discount the stream of payments that you can receive from a machine by the interest rate. It will always have to be less than $10,000. Because this $10,000 will be in 1 year, over a period of 1 year. And you have to pay the money right now. So, let's say that discounted value product. Don't ask me about mathematical formulas. Next week, we will deal with the exact mathematical structure, how the discounting process works. But for now, just intuitively accept that it has to be reduced to some degree. Discounted value product. That's the key concept, the key concept here. Remember that, write down that, understand that. All prices of all factors of production, human, non-human, labor, machines, raw materials, everything, the prices of everything are determined by and the discounted value productivity. Value productivity we explained. Discounting is just a reduction to take into account the time horizon of investment, reduced by the interest rate. You don't pay the full value productivity in the present to any factor of production. You pay discount value productivity reduced somewhat. Because you as an entrepreneur pay in the present and receive the income from using that factor in the future. Any questions about this discounting process? Is this clear? Why I pay $950 instead of $1,000? This is the value that I'm gonna derive from your work for me over 1 year. That's how much additional money I'm gonna earn by having you in my firm. Seemingly a fair trade would be to pay you the full value of your work, but it's not fair because I pay you now and I receive compensation in the future. So that means that your wage has to be reduced somewhat to take into account this difference in the moment when we receive our income. Of course, there are other reasons actually. It's not only time discount here, also it's a risk we discussed last time. I'm taking risk if the firm goes by the wayside. I'm gonna lose everything. You're gonna lose far less. So that's another component. So profit has. This is kind of weird here. That profit, what we call the accounting profit, has many different components. This is this time preference component. This is the interest component, pure interest, right? And has this risk component. So we don't take into account this discounting process here doesn't take into account risk. We just take into account interest. We'll talk about profit also in 2 or 3 weeks that we have left for ourselves. Okay, so this was kind of complicated, but hopefully that I succeeded in convincing you that it makes sense. It's not so complicated as you can see. Any final questions? No. Okay, please, if you have, I will post this lecture. If you have any questions about it, don't hesitate to ask me to clarify once again, to do whatever I want, whatever I can. So have a nice weekend, everybody. I'll see you all on Monday.